My wife's secret. Thursday meetings were destroying our marriage until I followed her. What would you do if after 25 years of marriage you discovered your wife had been sneaking out every Thursday at 3 p.m.? I thought I knew everything about Margaret, until that day I came home sick from work and saw her leaving the house dressed better than she had in years, with a look in her eyes I hadn't seen since we were young. What I discovered when I followed her changed not just our marriage, but our entire family forever. If you've ever wondered whether some secrets are worth keeping, this story will make you question everything. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how a dying stranger in a hospital bed became the key to saving my family. The grandfather clock in our living room had just finished chiming 3 times when I saw my wife of 25 years slip out the front door with the careful quietness of someone who believed they were alone in the house. I shouldn't have been home not on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of March, not when quarterly reports were due and the entire financial department was drowning in spreadsheets and projections. But the stomach flu that had been circulating through our Cincinnati office had finally caught up with me, and my secretary had practically pushed me out the door when she saw me turn green during the morning meeting. Robert Sullivan, that's me 58 years old, graying at the temples in what Margaret used to call a distinguished way, though lately she hadn't commented on my appearance at all. I'd been the chief financial officer at Midwest Mutual Insurance for the past 12 years, climbing the corporate ladder with the methodical persistence that had defined most of my adult life. Numbers made sense to me. They followed rules, patterns, predictable trajectories. Unlike people, unlike marriages that slowly unraveled thread by thread until you couldn't remember what the original fabric had looked like. I stood frozen behind the curtain of our bedroom window watching Margaret walk down our driveway with a purposefulness I hadn't seen in months. She was wearing her blue dress, the one I'd bought her for our 20th anniversary, the one that brought out the color in her eyes. Her brown hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, fell loose around her shoulders. She'd put on lipstick. When was the last time I'd seen her wear lipstick on a weekday? The sound of her car starting jolted me from my stupor. This wasn't the first time. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, making my already queasy stomach churn violently. Those Thursday afternoons when I'd called home and gotten no answer. Her explanations about grocery shopping that took 3 hours. The way she'd been distracted lately, staring out windows with an expression I couldn't read, starting sentences and then trailing off as if she'd forgotten what she was going to say. 25 years. A quarter of a century of morning coffees and shared newspapers, of raising our daughter Emily through skinned knees and first heartbreaks of building a life in this colonial house on Maple Street, with its wraparound porch and the oak tree we'd planted the year Emily was born. How long had Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock been her secret? I sank onto our bed, the mattress creaking under my weight. The room smelled like her perfume white shoulders, the same scent she'd worn since college. The framed photos on her dresser seemed to mock me our wedding day, both of us young and radiant with possibility. Emily's high school graduation last year, the 3 of us squinting in the sun. Our last vacation to Hilton Head, Margaret's smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emily, God, Emily. She was at Ohio State now, her freshman year, calling less and less as she built her new life. What would this do to her? The thought of our daughter's face crumpling with disappointment made my chest tight. She idolized her mother, saw her as the epitome of loyalty and steadfastness. Margaret had been the one to teach her about integrity, about keeping promises, about the sacred nature of commitment. But maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Margaret volunteering somewhere she hadn't mentioned. A book club. A therapy appointment she was embarrassed about. Even as I thought it, I knew I was grasping at straws. The careful way she'd checked the street before getting in her car, the dress, the lipstick, it all pointed to something deliberate, something hidden. I thought about the past few months searching for signs I might have missed. She'd been distant since Emily left for college, but I'd attributed that to empty nest syndrome. We'd rattled around this too large house like strangers sharing a hotel, polite but disconnected. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics, who would call the plumber about the leaky faucet. Did I remember to pay the property taxes should we accept the Hendersons' invitation to their anniversary party? When had we stopped really talking? When had we stopped really seeing each other? The nausea that had sent me home from work intensified, though now I couldn't tell if it was the flu or the growing certainty that my marriage was crumbling. I made it to the bathroom just in time, gripping the cool porcelain as my body expelled what little breakfast I'd managed to eat. When the heaving finally stopped, I rested my forehead against the toilet seat, feeling pathetic and old and foolish. The bathroom tiles were cold under my knees, the same white hexagonal pattern we'd chosen together 15 years ago during our renovation. Margaret had wanted something classic, timeless. "We're going to grow old in this house, Robert," she'd said, holding tile samples up to the light. "Let's choose something we won't get tired of looking at." Were we still going to grow old together? The question echoed in the sudden silence of the empty house. I pulled myself up, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. When had I gotten so old? The face looking back at me was pale and drawn with deep lines around the eyes and mouth. My father's face, though Dad had made it to 62 before Mom left him for her dance instructor. I'd been 33, then secure in my own marriage, privately judgmental of my parents' failure to make it work. Now at nearly the same age, I understood how decades could slip by while you weren't paying attention, how two people could wake up one day and realize they'd become strangers. The clock in the hallway chimed 3:30. Wherever Margaret had gone, she was there now, with whoever she was meeting, doing whatever it was that required secrecy and lipstick in her best dress. I wandered back to our bedroom, drawn to her side of the closet. Her clothes hung in neat rows, organized by color and season. So like Margaret, everything in its place. I ran my hand along the fabric's cotton blouses for everyday wool skirts for church, the black dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral 3 years ago. At the back, pushed behind her winter coats, I found a shopping bag from Nordstrom. Inside was a silk nightgown, tag still attached in a deep burgundy color I'd never seen her wear. The receipt was dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when she'd told me she was having lunch with her sister Linda. I sat heavily on the ottoman at the foot of our bed, the shopping bag crinkling in my lap. The nightgown was beautiful, expensive, nothing like the practical cotton pajamas Margaret usually wore. It was the kind of thing a woman bought for someone else to see someone else to appreciate. My phone buzzed with a text from my secretary asking if I was feeling better and reminding me about tomorrow's board meeting. The normal world continuing on while mine tilted off its axis. I texted back that I was fine, would be in tomorrow trying to maintain the facade of normalcy, even as everything felt anything but normal. The house settled around me with small creaks and sighs, sounds I rarely heard during the busy weekdays. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen below. The oak tree brushed against Emily's bedroom window in the breeze. Somewhere a dog barked, probably the Morrisons' golden retriever. Life continuing on Maple Street as if nothing had changed. I thought about calling Margaret's cell phone, manufacturing some reason to check in. But what would I say? "Hi, honey, just wondering where you are on this Thursday afternoon when you think I'm at work." No, if she was going to lie, I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was dealing with. The thought of hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but it felt like something out of a bad movie. This was my wife, the woman who'd held my hand through my father's death, who'd stayed up all night with me when Emily had appendicitis at age 10, who knew that I liked my coffee with 2 sugars and no cream, that I was secretly afraid of heights, that I cried at the end of Field of Dreams every single time. But apparently I didn't know her as well as I'd thought. The afternoon sun slanted through the bedroom windows, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air. Everything looked different in this unexpected Thursday light, shabbier, somehow worn around the edges. The bedspread had a small tear I'd never noticed. The paint on the windowsill was starting to peel. When had our life become so frayed without my noticing? 4 o'clock came and went. 4:30. By 5, I'd moved to the living room, positioning myself in the armchair that gave me a clear view of the driveway. I tried to read, tried to watch television, but couldn't focus on anything except the sound of cars passing, wondering each time if it was her. At 5:43, Margaret's Honda Accord pulled into the driveway. I watched her sit in the car for a full minute before getting out, saw her check her appearance in the rearview mirror, touch up her lipstick, then wipe it off with a tissue. When she finally emerged, the blue dress was slightly wrinkled, her hair no longer perfectly styled. She looked tired. She looked sad. She looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. I heard her key in the lock, her footsteps in the foyer. "Robert," she called out, surprise evident in her voice. "Your car's in the driveway. Are you home?" "In here." I managed my voice rougher than intended. She appeared in the doorway, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Her face cycled through expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been fear. "You're home early," she said, setting her purse on the side table with studied casualness. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Stomach flu," I said. Had to leave the office. Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Can I get you anything? Some ginger ale toast. The concern in her voice sounded genuine, and for a moment I wanted to pretend everything was normal. To let her make me toast and ginger ale, to crawl into bed and have her cool hand on my forehead to wake up tomorrow and discover this had all been a fever dream. Where were you? The question came out before I could stop it. She stilled her hand halfway to removing her earring. Just running errands. You know, Thursday things. Thursday things. As if that explained everything. As if that was all the explanation a husband of 25 years deserved. You're dressed up for errands, I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral. She glanced down at the blue dress as if surprised to find herself wearing it. Oh, this I just felt like making an effort today. You know how it is, sometimes you need to feel human again. Feel human again. What did that mean? When had she stopped feeling human, and why hadn't she told me? Margaret, I started, but she was already moving toward the kitchen. Let me make you some soup, she called over her shoulder. You should eat something even with a stomach bug. Remember what Dr. Patterson says about keeping your strength up. I listened to her moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of cabinets opening pots, clanging the gas stove, clicking to life. Normal sounds of a normal evening, except nothing was normal anymore. I'd seen her leave. I'd seen her deliberate secrecy. I knew about the nightgown hidden in the closet. What I didn't know was what to do about it. The smell of chicken soup soon filled the house, and despite everything, my stomach rumbled with hunger. Margaret had always been a good cook, learned from her Italian grandmother, who'd believed food could cure any ailment, mend any rift. But could it fix this? Could anything fix this? She brought me a tray with soup crackers and ginger ale, setting it carefully on the coffee table. Small sips, she said the same thing she'd said to Emily whenever she was sick. Don't rush it. As I ate, she sat in the chair across from me, not quite meeting my eyes. She'd changed out of the blue dress into her usual evening attire yoga pants and an old Ohio State sweatshirt of Emily's. Without makeup, I could see the dark circles under her eyes, the new lines around her mouth. When had she started looking so tired? When had we both gotten so old? I called Emily earlier, she said, filling the silence. She has a big chemistry test tomorrow. She sounded stressed. She'll do fine, I replied automatically. She always does. I know, I just worry about her all alone down there. She's hardly alone. She has her roommate, her study group, that boy she mentioned, what was his name, Tyler. Trevor, Margaret corrected. His name is Trevor. Of course she would remember. She remembered everything about Emily, every friend's name, every important date, every hope and fear our daughter had ever shared. She was a good mother. She'd been a good wife too, hadn't she? Or had I just assumed she was while she was quietly becoming someone else? I think I'll go to bed early, I said, pushing the half-empty bowl away. Good idea. Rest is the best medicine. She stood to take the tray, and for a moment her hand brushed mine. Her skin was cold despite the warm house. Robert. I looked up at her, hoping for what, a confession, an explanation, an assurance that everything was going to be okay. Feel better, she said softly, and then she was gone, carrying the tray back to the kitchen, leaving me alone with my doubts and the growing certainty that Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock were going to change everything. That night I lay in bed listening to Margaret's breathing beside me. She'd taken longer than usual in the bathroom, and when she'd finally slipped under the covers, she'd stayed on her side of the bed, careful not to touch me. She wasn't asleep. Her breathing was too controlled, too careful. We lay there in the dark. Two people pretending to sleep, pretending everything was fine. Pretending we weren't strangers, sharing a bed. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red, 11:47 p.m. In 4 hours and 13 minutes, it would be Friday. But next Thursday would come as Thursdays always did. And when it did, I would be ready. I would follow her. I would find out the truth, whatever it was, whatever it cost. Because after 25 years, I deserved to know why my wife needed to feel human again on Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock, and why that journey was one she couldn't share with me. The oak tree scraped against the window, and somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked. Margaret shifted beside me, a small sigh escaping her lips. In the darkness I could smell her perfume, white shoulders familiar as breathing. But underneath it was something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Another place's scent, another person's world. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time she'd reached for me in the dark, the last time we'd made love without it feeling like an obligation, The last time she'd looked at me the way she used to when we were young, and everything was still possible. But the memories felt distant, faded, like old photographs left too long in the sun. Tomorrow I would go to work and pretend everything was normal. I would sit through the board meeting and review the quarterly reports and make decisions about other people's money, while my own life fell apart. But next Thursday, I would know the truth. The clock turned to midnight, the red numbers blinking in the darkness. Friday had arrived, bringing me one day closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Beside me, Margaret finally fell into real sleep, her breathing deep and even. I wondered what she dreamed about. I wondered if I was still in her dreams at all, or if Thursday afternoons had replaced me there, too. The following Thursday came with the inevitable certainty of all dreaded things. I'd spent the week in a state of hypervigilance, watching Margaret for signs, for clues, for anything that might prepare me for what I was about to discover. But she'd been perfectly normal, making dinners, asking about my day, calling Emily at her usual times. If anything, she seemed more present than she had in months, as if my early arrival home last week had reminded her to be more careful. I'd arranged everything meticulously. A fictional lunch meeting with clients that would run long. My secretary informed that I'd be unreachable all afternoon. My car parked 3 blocks away at the strip mall, ready for pursuit. I'd even bought a baseball cap and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous, but desperate for disguise. Robert Sullivan, CFO, reduced to amateur surveillance of his own wife. At 2:45, I positioned myself in the parking lot of the CVS on Henderson Road, with a clear view of the route Margaret would have to take from our house. I'd mapped it out considering alternate routes, but this was the main artery leading anywhere significant from Maple Street. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the rearview mirror. When had I become this person? When had suspicion replaced trust as the foundation of my marriage? At 3:07, Margaret's Honda passed by. She was wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day, her hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2 like someone taking a driving test. I waited 3 cars before pulling out behind her, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the radio. She drove carefully, signaling every turn, complete stops at every sign. So unlike the Margaret who usually drove with casual confidence, one hand on the wheel, singing along to whatever was on the radio. This was someone with a destination that mattered, someone who couldn't afford to be stopped, to be delayed, to be discovered. We drove through suburban Columbus, past the shopping centers and chain restaurants, past the good school districts we'd chosen for Emily, past the life we'd built together, piece by careful piece. She never looked in her rearview mirror, never showed any sign she knew she was being followed. Why would she? I was supposed to be at work, trustworthy, Robert predictable as sunrise. 20 minutes into the drive, she turned onto Route 23, heading north. My confusion grew. This wasn't the direction of downtown hotels or apartment complexes. This was heading toward Delaware County, toward farmland and small towns. Where was she going? Another 15 minutes and she exited at Powell Road, turning east toward the medical district. My stomach clenched. Was she sick? Was that the secret? But no, she would have told me if she was ill. We had good insurance, shared medical decisions. We'd been through health scares before my high blood pressure, her benign tumor 5 years ago. We'd faced those together. She pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Methodist Hospital. I held back, watching from a distance as she parked in the visitor section and walked toward the main entrance. She wasn't rushing like someone late for an appointment. She walked with purpose, but also reluctance, like someone approaching a duty they couldn't avoid but didn't relish. I found a parking spot with a view of her car and settled in to wait. The hospital loomed before me, all glass and concrete, holding its secrets. Was she visiting someone, a sick friend she hadn't told me about? But why the secrecy? Why the dress and lipstick last week? 45 minutes passed. An hour. Families came and went, some crying, some laughing, the whole spectrum of human emotion that hospitals contained. At 4:30, just when I was starting to worry she'd left through another exit, I saw her emerge. But she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her. Younger than us, maybe mid-30s, Asian features, wearing a hospital gown and robe before a pole rolling beside him. They walked slowly, Margaret matching his careful pace. As they reached a bench in the small garden area beside the entrance, she helped him sit, adjusting the blanket around his shoulders with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I couldn't see their faces clearly from this distance, but their body language spoke volumes. The way she leaned toward him, the way he rested his head briefly on her shoulder, the way they sat in comfortable silence, watching the birds at the feeder someone had installed in the garden. This was intimacy, but not the kind I'd feared. This was something else entirely. They sat for perhaps 20 minutes before a nurse came out and helped the man back inside. Margaret hugged him a long, desperate embrace that even from a distance looked like someone trying to hold on to something slipping away. When he was gone, she sat back down on the bench and put her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was crying. My wife was crying alone on a hospital bench over a man I'd never seen before, and I had no idea why. I waited until she'd composed herself and driven away before leaving my hiding spot. The drive home was a blur of confusion and questions. Who was he? Why was she visiting him? Why hadn't she told me? The relief that it wasn't an affair was tempered by the realization that this secret, whatever it was perhaps even more complex than infidelity. That evening, Margaret made meatloaf my favorite. She asked about the client lunch, and I lied, smoothly hating myself for it. We watched Jeopardy together, her calling out answers a beat before me as always. When she went to bed, I stayed up claiming work to finish, but really I was Googling, searching, trying to find clues. Riverside Methodist Hospital. Cancer ward, I'd seen the signs. Young Asian man, approximately 35. It wasn't much to go on. The next Thursday, I followed her again. Same time, same hospital, same man. This time I'd brought binoculars had I really become this person, and I could see them more clearly. He was thin, gaunt in the way of the seriously ill, but his smile when he saw Margaret was radiant. She'd brought a container of something soup, probably knowing Margaret. She fed him small spoonfuls, patient with his slow consumption, wiping his mouth gently when needed. There was love there. Not romantic love, but something profound nonetheless. The kind of bone-deep connection that transcended explanation. But what was it, and why was it secret? That night I couldn't stand it anymore. I called Jack Morrison, not the neighbor with the golden retriever, but his brother, the private investigator. We'd met at a neighborhood barbecue years ago, and I'd kept his card, never imagining I'd need it. Jack, it's Robert Sullivan. From Maple Street, I need your help with something delicate. Marital? He asked, cutting straight to the point. I don't know, I admitted. That's what I need to find out. We met the next morning at a coffee shop downtown, far from anyone who might recognize us. Jack was younger than I'd remembered, maybe 45, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in his profession. I explained the situation, feeling like I was betraying Margaret with every word. You want me to identify the man she's visiting, Jack clarified, taking notes in a small notebook. I want to know who he is and why my wife has been secretly visiting him every Thursday for God knows how long. Could be a relative, Jack suggested. Maybe someone she's embarrassed about. Mental illness, addiction, prison record. People keep all kinds of family secrets. She's told me about all her relatives. Her family's not that big. Irish Catholic on her father's side, Italian on her mother's. I've met them all, been to their weddings and funerals. What about friends from before you met? We met in college. She was 20, I was 22. That's 36 years of history together. Or so I thought. Jack studied me over his coffee cup. You sure you want to know? Sometimes the truth is worse than the suspicion. Not knowing is killing me, I admitted. And it's killing our marriage, too, even if she doesn't realize it. I can't look at her without wondering. I can't touch her without thinking about this secret between us. All right, Jack nodded. Give me a week. I'll have answers for you. That week crawled by. Margaret seemed to sense something was off, asking several times if I was feeling okay, if work was stressing me out. Emily called midweek, bubbling with excitement about making the dean's list, and we managed a normal family conversation, Margaret and I passing the phone back and forth, proud parents united in our joy for our daughter. For those 20 minutes, I remembered what we used to be. Jack called the following Tuesday. Can you meet? I have the information you wanted. We met at the same coffee shop. He slid a manila folder across the table to me, and I stared at it for a long moment, knowing that once I opened it, there was no going back. His name is Thomas Chen. Jack began saving me from having to open the folder just yet. 35 years old. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosed 8 months ago. He's been at Riverside for the past 6 weeks. Terminal. Who is he to Margaret? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Jack was quiet for a moment. This is where it gets complicated. Thomas Chen was adopted as an infant in 1989 by David and Patricia Chen of Cleveland. The adoption was closed records sealed. But I have a contact at the adoption agency. Thomas started searching for his birth parents 2 years ago after his adoptive parents died in a car accident. He found his birth mother 8 months ago, right around the time of his diagnosis. The coffee shop seemed to spin around me. Margaret. Margaret gave birth to a son on March 15, 1989 at St. Anne's Hospital in Cleveland. She was 17 years old. The father is listed as unknown on the birth certificate. The baby was given up for adoption 3 days later. 17. Margaret had been 17. We'd met when she was 20, told each other everything, or so I'd thought. She'd never mentioned a baby. Never mentioned this enormous loss, this secret she'd carried for 36 years. There's more, Jack said gently. Her sister Linda was involved. She signed as a witness on the adoption papers. She would have been 21 at the time. Linda knew, her sister knew, and had kept this secret all these years. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every time she'd played the doting aunt to Emily, all while knowing Margaret had another child out there somewhere. According to hospital records, Jack continued, Thomas reached out to Margaret through Linda initially. That was about 6 months ago. Margaret started visiting him regularly when he entered hospice care at Riverside. Every Thursday, 3 to 5 p.m. She's listed as a family member on his visitor log. I opened the folder, finally seeing the documentation Jack had gathered. A photo of Thomas from his driver's license before the cancer handsome healthy, with Margaret's eye shape and smile. His adoption records partially redacted but revealing enough. Hospital visitor logs showing Margaret's name week after week, Thursday after Thursday. He has a daughter, Jack added. Sophie Chen, 8 years old. The mother, Amy Chen, died in a boating accident 2 years ago. That's what prompted Thomas to search for his birth parents. He wanted to know his biological family before it was too late, wanted his daughter to have connections after he was gone. A granddaughter. We had a granddaughter Margaret had never told me about. What do I do with this? I asked Jack, feeling lost. That's not my department, he said, not unkindly. But in my experience, secrets this big don't stay secret forever. She's going to have to tell you eventually. The question is whether you want to wait for that or take control of the situation yourself. That Thursday, I didn't follow Margaret. I couldn't bear to watch her with Thomas again, knowing what I knew, seeing her comfort the son she'd given up, the son she'd never told me about. Instead, I sat in my office staring at the photo Jack had given me of Thomas before his illness. I could see Margaret in his features, but also something else. A gentleness around the eyes, a determined set to the jaw that reminded me of Emily. Emily, how would she react to learning she had a brother who was dying, that her mother had kept this secret her entire life, that her parents' marriage, which she'd always seen as the gold standard, was built on a foundation with such a massive crack in it? My secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Sullivan, your wife is on line 1. Margaret calling at 4 o'clock on a Thursday. She must be done with her visit. Robert, her voice sounded tired, strained. I'm running a little late. I'll pick up Chinese food for dinner. Is that okay? That's fine, I managed. Are you all right? You sound strange. Just a long day. I love you, she said, and it sounded like an apology, like a plea, like goodbye all at once. I love you too, I replied and meant it, even though I didn't know if love would be enough to survive this. That night over Kung Pao chicken and fried rice, I watched my wife carefully. She pushed food around her plate, lost in thought. There were new lines around her eyes, a tremor in her hands I hadn't noticed before. The weight of her secret was crushing her, and she was trying to bear it alone. Margaret, I began, but she looked up at me with such exhaustion that I stopped. Not tonight, Robert, she said quietly. Please, can we just have a normal dinner? Can we just be us for tonight? So we did. We talked about Emily's classes, about the Hendersons' anniversary party, about whether we should finally fix the gutters. We pretended everything was normal, both of us playing our parts in a marriage that had become more performance than reality. But underneath the normal conversation, I could feel the truth pressing against us, demanding to be acknowledged. After dinner, Margaret went to bed early, claiming a headache. I sat in my study, looking at the photo of Thomas again, then at the family photos on my desk. There was one of Emily as a baby, Margaret holding her in the hospital, looking radiantly happy, but also something else. Was that guilt in her eyes? Had she been thinking of her first child, the one she'd given up every time she held our daughter? The study felt too small, the house too quiet. I walked out to the back porch, breathing in the cool April air. The oak tree Emily and I had planted when she was 5 was budding with new leaves, life continuing growing even as other things died. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Love you, Dad. Mom seemed sad when I talked to her earlier. Is everything okay? What could I tell her? That everything was falling apart, that the mother she idolized had been living a double life, that she had a brother she'd never met who was dying in a hospital 40 minutes away. Everything's fine, sweetheart, I typed back. Just work stress. Love you too. Another lie added to the growing pile, but what else could I do? The truth wasn't mine to tell, it was Margaret's. But would she ever find the courage to tell it? Or would she let Thomas die with the secret intact? Let this thing she'd hidden fester between us until there was nothing left of our marriage but polite strangers sharing a house? As I stood there in the darkness, I made a decision. Next Thursday, I wouldn't follow Margaret. I wouldn't hide in parking lots or peer through binoculars like some character in a bad detective novel. Next Thursday, I would go to the hospital myself. I would meet Thomas Chen, my wife's son. I would look him in the eye and figure out what to do with this truth that threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved for 36 years. Because secrets I was learning were like cancer, they grew in darkness, spreading their poison through silence and shame. And the only cure was light, no matter how much it burned. The automatic doors of Riverside Methodist Hospital whispered open, and I walked into the controlled climate of institutional care, that particular mixture of disinfectant, floor wax, and human hope that all hospitals share. It was Thursday, 7:47 p.m. Margaret would arrive in 13 minutes if she kept to her schedule. I'd gotten here early, needing time to gather courage for what I was about to do. The information desk was staffed by a volunteer, an elderly woman with kind eyes behind thick glasses. I'm here to visit Thomas Chen. I said the name feeling foreign on my tongue. He's in the oncology ward. She typed into her computer, then looked up with a practiced smile that held a note of sympathy. Room 4B 217. Take the elevator to the 4th floor, turn right, follow the blue line on the floor. The elevator ride seemed endless, though it was only 4 floors. A young couple got on at the 2nd floor, the woman obviously pregnant, both of them glowing with anticipation. Life beginning while elsewhere in this building, life was ending. The circular nature of it all made my chest tight. The oncology ward had tried to be cheerful paintings of landscapes on the walls, a small meditation room, a family lounge with puzzles and magazines no one was reading. But nothing could mask what this place was, a way station between life and death, a place where hope and despair existed in equal measure. Room 4B 217 was at the end of the hall. The door was partially open and I could hear voices inside, a man's weak laugh, a woman reading aloud. Not Margaret's voice. I knocked gently and pushed the door open. Thomas Chen was propped up in bed, and even having seen him from a distance, I wasn't prepared for how ill he looked up close. His skin had a grayish pallor, his cheeks hollow, the hospital gown hanging loose on his skeletal frame. But his eyes, Margaret's eyes, were alert and curious as they focused on me. The woman sitting beside him was reading from what looked like a children's book. She was perhaps 30 Asian features professional looking, even in jeans and a sweater. She looked up at me with polite confusion. I'm sorry, I began, then stopped. How did I explain who I was when I wasn't even sure myself? I'm Robert Sullivan. I'm Margaret's husband. Thomas's voice was weak but certain. She has photos of you in her wallet. You're taller than I expected. The casual admission that Margaret carried photos of me, showed them to him, shared our life with him, hit me unexpectedly hard. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to run or enter. Please come in, Thomas said, gesturing weakly to another chair. This is my friend Susan. She reads to me when the words start swimming on the page. He studied my face with those familiar eyes. Margaret doesn't know you're here. No, I admitted, finally stepping into the room. She doesn't. Susan excused herself tactfully, saying she'd get coffee, leaving us alone. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sound of hospital life beyond the door. How long have you known? Thomas asked. 2 weeks. I hired someone to find out who you were. I followed her here, saw you both in the garden. You must hate me, he said simply. I don't know what I feel, I admitted, sinking into the visitor's chair. I don't hate you. How could I hate someone I don't even know? But your existence has turned my entire life upside down. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding more than I'd expressed. She wanted to tell you. So many times, she said. Especially when Emily was born. She said holding Emily brought it all back the 3 days she had with me before the adoption. 3 days, I repeated. She had you for 3 days. My adoptive parents were good people. Thomas said, his words coming slowly, carefully, as if each one cost him energy he couldn't spare. They loved me, gave me everything. But I always wondered, where I came from, why I was given up. When they died, I had to know. And you found Linda first. Linda was easier to track down. Same last name as on the birth certificate, still living in Ohio. She was terrified when I contacted her. Thought I was angry, wanted money, wanted to destroy Margaret's life. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I just wanted to know my mother before it was too late. The cancer, I started. Already stage 3 when they found it. Pancreatic cancer doesn't give you much time. I had maybe a year, they said. It's been 8 months. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. When Linda finally told Margaret about me, that I was sick, dying, Margaret came immediately. No hesitation. She walked into this room like she'd been waiting 36 years to see me again. I could picture it, Margaret's determined stride, her way of facing difficult things head-on once she'd made a decision. Except she hadn't faced this with me. She'd kept me in the dark, protected me from this truth, or protected herself from my reaction. Why didn't she tell me? The question came out more plaintive than I'd intended. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. She was 17 when she had me, 17 and terrified. Her parents, your in-laws, they never knew. Only Linda. They told everyone Margaret was staying with an aunt that spring, helping with a new baby. Instead, she was in a home for unwed mothers in Cleveland, giving birth to a baby she couldn't keep. I thought of Margaret's parents, both gone now, her strict Catholic father, her nervous mother, who'd never stood up to him. I could imagine their reaction if they'd known their teenage daughter was pregnant. The shame, the fury, the crushing disappointment. The father, I asked. A boy from her high school. He enlisted in the army when she told him about the pregnancy. Died in a training accident before I was born. She never even got to tell him she was giving me up. Jesus. 17 years old, pregnant, the father, dead parents who would have disowned her. No wonder she'd kept it secret. But 36 years of marriage, surely at some point she could have trusted me with this. She has a box, Thomas said suddenly. Linda told me. A box of things she kept from those 3 days. Hospital bracelet, a blanket, one photo the nurse took. Hidden in your attic, Linda said. She's looked at it every March 15th, my birthday, for 36 years. Every March 15th. I thought back through the years. Margaret always seemed sad, and March claimed it was seasonal depression, the tail end of winter getting to her. I'd bring her flowers, try to cheer her up, never knowing she was mourning the child she'd given away. The door opened and my heart nearly stopped. But it was Susan returning with coffee, not Margaret. She handed me a cup without my asking, seemed to understand I needed something to hold on to. Mr. Sullivan, Thomas said, and there was urgency in his voice now. I need to ask you something. I have a daughter, Sophie. She's 8. I know, I said. The investigator told me. Her mother? Amy died 2 years ago. Boating accident. Sophie lives with Amy's parents in Michigan, but they're in their 70s, not in great health themselves. He paused, gathering strength. I've been trying to find someone to take her when I'm gone. Amy was an only child. I have no siblings, well, except Emily, but she doesn't know I exist. The implication hung in the air between us. I stared at him, this dying man who was my wife's son, who was asking me to consider taking in his daughter, my wife's granddaughter, a child Margaret didn't even know existed. Sophie's never met Margaret, Thomas continued. I wanted to tell Margaret about her, but I couldn't add that burden to what she's already carrying. Watching me die is killing her. She sits here every Thursday, and I can see her calculating how much time we have left, storing up memories for after I'm gone. But you're telling me, because you're here, because you came looking for the truth instead of hiding from it. Because Margaret chose you, built a life with you, raised a daughter with you. You're a good man. She wouldn't have married anyone else. Before I could respond, we heard voices in the hallway. Margaret's voice talking to someone about parking validation. Thomas and I looked at each other, and I saw my own panic reflected in his eyes. The bathroom, he whispered, pointing. It was undignified, a 58-year-old man hiding in a hospital bathroom, but I slipped inside just as Margaret entered the room. Through the door I could hear her greeting Thomas, her voice immediately softening in that way I recognized from when Emily was young and sick. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" she asked, and the endearment nearly broke me. She'd never called me sweetheart. That was reserved for Emily, and now apparently for Thomas. "Better," Thomas lied. "Susan's been reading to me." "The Hobbit," Susan explained. "He said he never read it as a child." "Robert read it to Emily when she was 10, Margaret said, and again the casual inclusion of our family life in this secret world jarred me. She loved it so much she dressed as a hobbit for Halloween that year. They chatted for a few minutes about books about the nurse who'd been particularly kind about the soup Margaret had brought. Normal conversation if you didn't know the weight of history beneath it, the tragedy of a mother and son finding each other just in time to say goodbye. Then Thomas said something that made my blood run cold. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." "Mom." He called her Mom. "What is it?" Margaret's voice carried alarm. "I have a daughter. Her name is Sophie. She's 8 years old." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear Margaret's reaction. "A daughter?" she finally whispered. "You have a daughter." I have a granddaughter. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to complicate things more than they already were. But I'm running out of time and Sophie needs." "Where is she? Can I meet her? Does she know about me?" "She's in Michigan with Amy's parents. Amy was my wife. She died 2 years ago." Another silence, then the sound of crying. Margaret crying. In 25 years of marriage, I'd seen her cry exactly 4 times when her father died, when her mother died, when we thought Emily had appendicitis, and when we dropped Emily off at college. Now she was crying for the granddaughter she'd never met, the daughter-in-law she'd never know the life her son had lived without her. "Bring her," Margaret said through her tears. "Please, let me meet her while there's still time." "I don't know if that's a good idea," Thomas said gently. "It might confuse her, hurt her more when I'm gone." "Please," Margaret begged, and the raw desperation in her voice was something I'd never heard before. "I've lost 36 years with you. Don't make me lose her, too." I couldn't stand it anymore. I opened the bathroom door and stepped out. Margaret's head whipped around her tear-stained face, going white with shock. She stood up so quickly she knocked over her purse contents, spilling across the linoleum floor. "Robert," it came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, Margaret." She looked between Thomas and me, understanding dawning. How long have you been here?" "About an hour," I said quietly. Her legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into the chair. Thomas reached for her hand, and she gripped it like a lifeline. They had the same hands, I noticed. Long fingers, delicate but strong. "I'm sorry," she said, though it wasn't clear who she was apologizing to. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," I said, moving closer. "Not now, not here." Susan excused herself again, murmuring something about giving us privacy. The 3 of us sat in that small room, the weight of secrets and time and impending loss pressing down on us. "You hired someone," Margaret said, not a question, but a statement. "You had me followed. You were disappearing every Thursday. The secrecy, the lies. What was I supposed to think?" "That I was having an affair," she said flatly. "You thought I was cheating on you. Weren't you in a way keeping this from me, this enormous part of your life, your history, keeping it locked away for 36 years? I wanted to tell you." "When?" The word came out harsher than intended. "When were you going to tell me Margaret, when he died? When you'd grieved alone and buried him and come home to pretend nothing had happened? Or were you never going to tell me?" "I don't know," she cried out, and Thomas squeezed her hand. "I don't know, okay? I've been trying to find the words for 6 months for 36 years, and they never come out right. How do you tell your husband you gave away a baby? How do you explain that kind of loss, that kind of shame? You tell him the truth," I said simply. "You trust him with your pain the way he's trusted you with his." She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the 17-year-old girl she'd been terrified and alone. I saw the 20-year-old who'd met me in college and decided to bury her past. I saw the 45-year-old who'd held Emily and remembered another baby. I saw all the versions of Margaret, and I loved them all, even the ones who'd lied to me. "I need some air," I said, suddenly overwhelmed. "I'll be back." I walked out, leaving mother and son together, and found my way to the hospital's rooftop garden. It was mostly empty, just a few benches and some potted plants struggling in the spring chill. The city spread out below life, continuing on while mine reconstructed itself piece by piece. I called Emily. I needed to hear my daughter's voice, needed to remember what was real and solid in my life. "Dad, aren't you at work?" "Playing hooky?" I said, attempting lightness. "How's my favorite daughter?" "Your only daughter?" She laughed, and the word only hit differently now. "I'm good. Stressed about finals, but good. Is Mom okay? She seemed weird lately when we talk." "She's going through something," I said carefully. "But she'll be okay. We'll all be okay." "You're being cryptic, Dad. Is this about menopause? Because my roommate's mom is going through that, and it's not menopause." I cut her off, managing a small laugh. "Emily, whatever happens, whatever you learn in the coming weeks, remember that your mother and I love you. That's never going to change." "Now you're scaring me. Are you guys getting divorced?" "No," I said firmly, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "No divorce. Just life is complicated sometimes, sweetheart. People are complicated. But love, real love, it survives complications." "Dad, are you okay? You sound like you're having some kind of breakdown." "I'm on the roof of a hospital thinking about your mother and secrets and second chances," I admitted. "Why are you at a hospital, Dad? What's going on?" "I'll explain everything soon, I promise. But not today. Not over the phone. Just how would you feel about maybe having a cousin, hypothetically?" "A cousin, Dad, Mom's an only child, and you just have Uncle Pete, who's definitely never having kids." "Hypothetically," I repeated. "I mean, sure, I always wanted a bigger family. You know that. I begged you guys for a sibling until I was like 12. "I remember. We'd tried for another child after Emily. 3 miscarriages in 4 years before the doctor advised us to stop trying. Margaret had grieved each loss intensely. Now I understood she was grieving not just those babies, but the first one too. "Dad, you're being super weird, but I have to go to class. Call me later when you're ready to speak in non-hypotheticals." "I love you, Em." "Love you too, you weirdo." I stayed on the roof until the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Then I went back to room 4B 217. Margaret was alone with Thomas. She was reading to him from The Hobbit, picking up where Susan had left off. He was asleep, or seemed to be, but she kept reading anyway, her voice soft and steady. She looked up when I entered, fear and hope warring in her expression. I sat down next to her, took the book from her hands, and found where she'd left off. I began to read, my voice joining the symphony of machines keeping Thomas alive. Margaret leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, maybe years, we felt like a unit, a couple in us. Thomas opened his eyes after a few pages. "You read just like Margaret described," he said weakly. "She said you did voices for all the characters." "Emily insisted on it," I said. "She was very particular about each character sounding different." "Will you—" He started, then stopped, gathering courage. "Will you tell Emily about me after?" Margaret made a small sound of pain, but I answered steadily. "We'll tell her everything. She deserves to know she has a brother, even if she doesn't get to meet you." "She could meet me?" Thomas said. "There's still time. Not much, but some." I looked at Margaret, saw the desperate hope in her eyes. "Semester ends in 2 weeks. We could bring her then?" "And Sophie?" Thomas asked. "My daughter." This was the moment, the precipice. We could step back, maintain the boundaries, keep our life separate from this tragedy. Or we could step forward into something unknown, complicated, potentially painful. "Bring her too," I said. "Margaret's right. She should know her family while there's time." Thomas closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he'd fallen asleep again. Then he said, "Thank you. Thank you both." We stayed until visiting hours ended. Margaret and I walked out together, our hands not quite touching the space between us, full of everything unsaid. In the parking lot, we stood between our 2 cars, uncertain how to proceed. "Come home," I said finally. "We need to talk. Really talk. No more secrets." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "No more secrets." At home, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, helped Emily with homework, celebrated and mourned, and lived our life. Margaret got the box from the attic, hands shaking as she placed it between us. Such a small box to hold such enormous grief. Inside was a hospital bracelet impossibly tiny, a white blanket with little blue stars, a single Polaroid photo of a young Margaret holding a newborn, her face a mixture of love and devastation. A birth certificate with the name Baby Boy McKenna, her maiden name before he became Thomas Chen. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything. So she did. She told me about Bobby Martinez, the boy who'd gotten her pregnant and then gotten scared, who'd joined the army to escape and died before he could change his mind. About the home for unwed mothers, where she'd spent 3 months, the girls there becoming closer than sisters through shared shame. About the labor, 16 hours of pain with only a disapproving nurse for company. About holding Thomas for 3 days, memorizing his face, his smell, the weight of him in her arms. About the social worker who'd taken him, promising he'd go to a good family, have a better life than a 17-year-old girl could give him. About returning home and pretending nothing had happened, finishing high school with everyone wondering why Margaret McKenna had gotten so quiet, so serious. About meeting me 3 years later and thinking she could start fresh, be someone new. About almost telling me a dozen times before our wedding, when I proposed, when Emily was born, when we lost the other babies, but never finding the courage. "I thought if you knew you'd leave," she said simply. "Or worse, you'd stay but never look at me the same way." I'd always be the girl who gave away her baby, who kept that secret, who lied every day of our marriage by not telling you. "Maybe," I admitted, and she flinched. "If you'd told me early on, maybe I would have reacted badly. I was young, probably more judgmental than I realized. But Margaret, we've been together 36 years. We've built a life, raised a child, survived losses, and celebrated joy. Did you really think so little of me, of us, that you couldn't trust me with this? It wasn't about trusting you," she said. "It was about hating myself. Every March 15th, I hated myself a little more. And then Linda called 6 months ago, said Thomas had found her, that he was dying, that he wanted to meet me. And I thought I could have this one thing separate. I could know him for whatever time was left, and then grieve him alone the way I'd grieved giving him up alone." "But you're not alone," I said, reaching across the table to take her hands. "You haven't been alone since you were 20 years old. That's what marriage means. You don't have to carry things alone anymore." She broke down then, sobbing with the accumulated grief of 36 years. I moved around the table, pulled her into my arms, and held her while she cried for the 17-year-old who'd had to give up her baby, for the dying son she'd just found, for the granddaughter. She might lose too, for all the years of secret-keeping that had built a wall between us, neither of us had fully recognized until now. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back to look at me. "Can you forgive me?" "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "I'm hurt. I'm angry that you didn't trust me, but I also understand at least a little. And I love you. That hasn't changed." "What do we do now?" "We tell Emily. We go to Michigan and meet Sophie. We figure out what Thomas needs for whatever time he has left. We face this together as a family." "He's going to die," she said, the words hollow with approaching loss. "Yes, but he doesn't have to die alone. And neither do you. You don't have to grieve alone this time." She kissed me, then the first real kiss we'd shared in months. It tasted of tears and relief and possibility. 2 weeks later, Emily came home from college. We sat her down in the living room and told her everything. She was shocked, hurt that we'd kept it from her, that Margaret had kept it from her, but also fascinated. "I have a brother," she kept saying. "A brother who's dying, but still, a brother." "And a niece," Margaret added. "A cousin for you. Her name is Sophie. When can I meet them?" "Tomorrow," I said, "if you want to." "Of course I want to. God, Mom, how did you keep this secret for so long?" Margaret looked at our daughter, so young, so sure of herself. "Fear," she said simply. "Fear and shame and the belief that some things are too big to forgive." "But Dad forgave you," Emily pointed out. "He's working on it," I corrected. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process." The next day, we drove to the hospital as a family. Emily was nervous, constantly checking her appearance in the mirror, wanting to make a good impression on the brother she'd never known existed. Margaret was quiet, holding my hand tightly as I drove. I was trying to prepare myself for whatever came next. Thomas was having a good day, more alert than I'd seen him. When Emily walked in, his face lit up with a smile that was pure Margaret. "You must be Emily," he said. "Mom's told me everything about you. I feel like I already know you." "Hi," Emily said shyly, then with more confidence. "Hi, brother." They talked for an hour, Emily showing him photos on her phone, telling him stories about college, asking him about his life. Margaret and I watched from the corner, seeing our daughter expand her heart to include this new family member, even as we prepared to lose him. The next day, we drove to Michigan to get Sophie. Amy's parents, the Lynns, were lovely people, overwhelmed by their grief and their granddaughter's needs. Sophie was a serious child with Thomas's eyes and Amy's delicate features. She was shy at first, but Emily won her over with silly faces and promises to paint her nails. "Are you my daddy's family?" Sophie asked Margaret directly with the frankness of children. "Yes," Margaret said, kneeling to Sophie's level. "I'm your grandmother. I'm so sorry I haven't been here before. Daddy said you didn't know about me." "That's right, but I know now, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to be part of your life." Sophie considered this seriously, then nodded. "Daddy's very sick." "I know, sweetheart. He's going to die soon." "I know that too. Will you be my family after he dies?" Margaret looked at me, question in her eyes. I nodded. "Yes," she told Sophie. "If you want us to be, we'll be your family forever." The last weeks of Thomas's life were a blur of hospital visits, legal arrangements, and family bonding compressed into 2 short moments. Emily deferred her summer plans to stay home, spending every possible moment with Thomas and Sophie. She read The Hobbit to both of them, doing voices just like I had for her. Sophie climbed carefully onto Thomas's hospital bed, curling against his too thin frame while Emily read. Margaret was there every day, no longer hiding, no longer alone. I came after work, bringing dinner for everyone, becoming part of this strange, beautiful, heartbreaking family we were creating in room 4B, 217. Thomas told us stories about his life, his adoptive parents who'd loved him fiercely, meeting Amy in graduate school, Sophie's birth, the shock of Amy's death, the search for his birth mother that led him to Margaret. He showed us photos on his laptop, sharing 36 years of life Margaret had missed. "I had a good life," he told her one evening when it was just the 3 of us. "The Chens loved me. I never felt unwanted or abandoned. You gave me to people who could give me what you couldn't at 17. You made the right choice." Margaret cried. She cried a lot those weeks, but they were healing tears, washing away decades of guilt and regret. On a warm Thursday in June, exactly 3 months after I'd first followed Margaret to the hospital, Thomas died. He went peacefully surrounded by family, Margaret holding one hand, Sophie holding the other, Emily and I standing close by. His last words were, "Thank you for finding me." We held the funeral in Cleveland where he'd grown up. The church was full, friends from college, colleagues from his job, the family who'd loved him for 36 years, meeting the family who'd loved him for 3 months. Sophie, in a black dress Emily had helped her choose, was stoic until the end when she broke down in Margaret's arms, calling her grandma for the first time. That night in our hotel room, Margaret and I held each other in the darkness. "I thought I'd lose you when you found out," she whispered. "You almost did," I admitted. But then I realized something. The secret you kept, it came from love. Love for Thomas, wanting to give him a better life. Love for me and Emily, wanting to protect us from your pain. It was misguided, maybe, but it was love. I'll never keep anything from you again. I know. We're really going to raise Sophie. Emily's already planning to teach her soccer and help with homework. You couldn't stop this if you tried. A year has passed now. Sophie lives with us, has her own room next to Emily's old one, though Emily's home so often it feels like we have 2 daughters. The adoption was finalized last month, Sophie Chen Sullivan keeping all her names, all her history. She and Emily are thick as thieves, the 8-year-old and the 20-year-old united in their love of nail-polished Disney movies and ganging up on me during board games. Margaret has found a peace I didn't know she was missing, the wound of giving up Thomas finally healing through loving his daughter. The Thursday 3 p.m. secret that nearly destroyed us ended up saving us, forcing us to confront the truth, to choose radical honesty and forgiveness, to expand our definition of family. We have a photo on the mantle now, all of us at the hospital during those last weeks. Thomas thin but smiling, Sophie on his lap, Emily making bunny ears behind his head, Margaret and I flanking them like the parents we'd become to this complicated, beautiful family. Sometimes I find Margaret in Sophie's room at night watching her sleep. She has his eyes. She'll whisper, and I'll hold her, both of us, remembering the man who brought us Sophie, who brought us back to each other, who taught us that some secrets are too heavy to carry alone, and that love, real love, means sharing the weight. Every Thursday at 3 p.m. we visit Thomas's grave. All of us. Margaret, Sophie, Emily, when she's home, and me. We bring flowers, tell him about our week, about Sophie's school adventures, Emily's college triumphs, the normal family things he's missing. Sophie always kisses the headstone before we leave, saying, "See you next week, Daddy." And Margaret always whispers, "Thank you for finding me." The secrets are gone now, replaced by truth, by family, by a love that's deeper for having been tested. Our marriage isn't what it was. It's stronger, more honest, built on the understanding that we're all broken in some way, all carrying weights that become lighter when shared. The grandfather clock in our living room still chimes 3 times every afternoon, but it no longer marks a secret. Now it marks the time we became whole,